I DM'd a 3-day D&D game while living in a 600-year-old English castle with my players, and it was the hardest game I've ever run. Actually, it gave me my first panic attack, so that was a fun milestone. By the way, did you know you can drink iced coffee out of a tankard? You can drink anything out of a tankard. Life hack. I get so many questions about D&D in a castle, and I always meant to make a whole video about it and just never got around to it. But I just finished turning the campaign I ran there into a published adventure module, so I thought, why not now? First, I feel like I need to explain why this whole thing was so terrifying to me. If you got an email that said, hey, we'd like to fly you to England and put you up in a historic castle where you can run any kind of D&D game you want, most of you would probably be like, I'll grab my dice and be at the airport in an hour. Well, I got that email in the summer of 2021, and to be totally honest, I almost said no. But to understand why, I think you first need to understand how all of this works. D&D in a Castle isn't just a description, it's the name of a specific event licensed by Wizards of the Coast. Several times a year, they invite a whole crew of experienced, well-known dungeon masters to some fantastical location, in my case, Lumley Castle near Durham. Some people say that it's not technically a castle since it was built as a manor house and then converted into a castle in the late 1300s, but Wikipedia calls it a castle, and I'm from Colorado, so I'm impressed by anything built more than 250 years ago. Anyway, the event invites these DMs, flies them out, and then pays them to run 24 hours of D&D across 3 days for a table of 6 paying guests. And when I say paying, I mean paying. They call this a luxury gaming retreat, and it is definitely priced like one. At the time, a seat at the game table was $2,850, and accommodations at the castle started at $1K. But that meant sharing a room with a stranger and staying in a courtyard room made from the former stables. If you want to be in the actual castle in your own room, you might pay up to $3,500. And of course, that's not including your travel to and from the castle. So obviously, for a lot of attendees, this was something they saved up for, and maybe the only vacation they'd be taking for several years. Of course, that rate included not just the game, but also meals and extra activities in between sessions like archery and falconry. But obviously, the D&D session was the main event, which means they were asking me to deliver a game that was worth thousands of dollars. That's a lot of pressure. At that time, I'd been playing for 3 years and DMing for a little over a year. My channel was picking up some steam, but I still felt pretty inexperienced as a dungeon master. I think most importantly, I hadn't run sessions for strangers, like at game stores or at conventions. I had only DM'd for my friends. I know my fellow anxiety havers will understand this. I would put my life into my friends' hands, but when they say nice things about me, they cannot be trusted. The only rational explanation is that they're lying to protect my feelings. My friends may say I'm a great dungeon master, but I trust those mother about as far as I can throw them. Which is not very far, since strength is my dump stat. I talked to my partner, my parents, my friends, my agent, and everybody seemed to think I could do it. At one point, I realized, am I really gonna let insecurity and self-doubt keep me from doing something this cool? Sure, I wasn't a pro DM yet, but I would never be one if I was too scared to run games for strangers. So I said yes. I decided to run the best D&D game I could and prove myself as a dungeon master, not just to the players at the table, but to myself. I know, that sounds very chicken soup for the soul, but that's how I was thinking about it. So they put my name up on the website, and to my horror, people actually bought tickets, which meant that it was time to decide what I was gonna run. I was told that I could run anything I want as long as it's D&D, which makes sense considering the name and the licensing, and I could have run a published module. In fact, some might say that would have been a smart thing to do, considering my lack of experience in this kind of game setting, but unfortunately, intelligence is my dump stat, so I decided to write a brand new mini campaign for the occasion. Now, my strength has always been vibes, so the concept part came very easily. I knew I wanted to do a folk horror story set in a spooky forest, think Brothers Grimm. The German folktales, not the Matt Damon and Heath Ledger movie with 2 stars on Rotten Tomatoes. I was aiming higher than that. I decided the campaign would be a mystery set in the isolated town of Alder Glen, deep in the Greenbrier Wood. Pulling from my favorite folk horror influences like Midsummer and The Wicker Man, I gave the townsfolk strange, unsettling customs to create a general sense of unease, and I made the forest dangerous and not quite right. Vibes? Check. But I was also very aware of my weaknesses, the big one being combat. I talk a big game, but once initiative actually gets rolled, I have a bad habit of pulling my punches. I've gotten a lot better, but back then I was still very scared to hit my PCs, and that often led to boring combat with low stakes. I knew that in order to feel confident about this game and the encounter balance, I would need to playtest it. So a few weeks before the trip, I invited some friends over, and I ran them through the adventure that I'd written. I figured I'd spot a few weak areas, make some tweaks, and then go into the castle feeling super prepared. But that was not what happened. During my first playtest session, the party completely broke the mystery in two different ways, to the point where we couldn't actually complete the adventure. I thanked them, sent them home, and cried in the shower. You know, the typical DM experience. In a regular home game, it would be fine if the players found some sort of clever way around whatever plot arc I'd laid out. But since this particular game had to last exactly 3 days, running a mystery was, in hindsight, an enormously stupid decision. It's not like I could just say, wow, you're so clever, you solved it. I guess we'll just play Go Fish for the other 2 days. I did my best over the next few weeks to fix the campaign, but by the time we left for England, easily half the material that I ended up with had never been tested. So we get on a plane, we get on another plane, I work on game prep 40,000 feet over the Atlantic, a flight gets delayed, they try to split me and my partner onto different flights, we talk to airline agents for several jet-lagged hours, we get different flights to a different airport, and by the time we finally arrive at the castle, we have several levels of exhaustion. I did my best to push through, but Constitution is my dump stat, and in between all of it, I'm still working on the adventure. First, we had this DM welcome dinner, and the talent at this event was humbling. I remember having some kind of awkward conversations with the other DMs where I was like, how's everyone feeling? Stressed out? Panicking? And everyone was like, no, I'm really excited. I can't wait to get started. And I was like, yeah, I was just joking, same. The next day, there's this opening ceremony where all the DMs stand at the front of the castle on top of these dramatic steps, and all the players stand at the bottom, and then the DMs read the names of their players from a scroll, like a royal proclamation, and then there's this big welcome dinner. It's called the Barovian Ball. It's a full-on feast. People wear costumes and formal clothes. There's a live medieval band. They really go all out. You know how the human body is like 60% water? Well, at that moment, the Ginny D body was 60% cortisol. But I told myself that once we actually started playing, it would get easier. This was just stage fright, but I'd run plenty of games. How different could this one be? So we kicked off the first session. Introducing Mostly Armless. I had first connected with my players online about 2 months before the game. I shared some information about what to expect, some guidance on character creation, and we did a little session 0 form. It was an incredibly fun group. A warlock who asked that his celestial patron have Captain Holt vibes from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a rogue described as a scout dad, a fighter who had aspirationally written the names of spells onto an obscene number of hand axes. My players were all incredibly nice and generous people, like improbably kind, every single one. And of course, they had had months to fine-tune their characters. And the way this manifested in their builds is that most of them had chosen at least one ability that buffed or healed or protected their party members. Do not underestimate how much more powerful a party gets when they work together. Teamwork, unfortunately, does make the dream work. Also, one of my players asked me if I would allow the spell Silvery Barbs. I'll bet about half of you just said out loud some version of, oh honey. I had never encountered this spell before, and wisdom is my dump stat, so I was like, sure, it's not homebrew or anything, it's in the official books, why would I ban it? Which means that even when I managed to land a lucky hit on this very powerful party, it just got canceled. The first combat was already meant to be pretty light, but up against Mostly Armless, it was downright trivial. On top of all this, they were moving through my content pretty fast, and this is partially because I was so nervous about my players being bored that I wasn't leaving any space for them. The moment there was a pause, I felt like I had to fill it up. I scraped my way through the first 2 sessions with this feeling of dread just building inside of me the whole time. I got back to my haunted room with its humongous canopy bed, and all the stress of the last few weeks just came out of me at once. I was convinced that my players would basically finish the adventure the next day, and I'd be I don't know, thrown out of the castle, pilloried and publicly shamed. There was a pillory outside the castle. That was not outside the realm of possibility. Now, I have had mental illness for my whole life in a bunch of different flavors, but that night I realized I had never actually had a full-on panic attack, and it's different, folks. It's different from regular anxiety. My reptile brain fully took over and was like, this is not a game of Dungeons and Dragons, this is life or death. I was like, oh, I can't breathe, I'm gonna throw up, I'm gonna faint, I'm gonna die in this room, and then there's gonna be 2 ghosts, and I'm gonna have to hang out with Lily, the ghost of Lumley Castle, for the rest of eternity, and she's from the 14th century, so we can't possibly have much in common. I'm sure my players are watching this video and thinking, was she playing a different game than us? Because while it certainly wasn't perfect, 90% of these problems existed only in my head. I'd worked myself up so much over this game before I even arrived, thinking about how much tickets cost, comparing myself to the other DMs, worrying about whether or not I'd be able to live up to what people expected from my YouTube videos. I had completely forgotten to have any fun. Thankfully, there is no better place to be going through a D&D crisis than in a castle with a bunch of experienced game masters. It turns out that once I admitted to being stressed, they all had some great advice for me. My second combat went a lot better, we all got a little more comfortable as we got to know each other, and I started gaining some confidence and actually having some fun. It is crazy how much the simple act of laughing and joking with my party just magically made me a better dungeon master. Nothing brings a group of people together like someone walking into the room while you're reading the Wikipedia page about corpse decomposition out loud. I also realized I needed to stop dedicating every single moment of free time to game prep. I was in this incredibly cool castle with all these incredibly cool people, and I was wasting it by hiding away in my room, acting like writing a few more bullet points would meaningfully affect an adventure that I had been writing for months. I got to hold a barn owl named Heidi, and you cannot feel anything but pure joy when holding an owl. She was hungry and very mad about it, and I found that really relatable. As much as the game had improved, I knew I had to give my party a really strong conclusion to make the whole adventure come together. In fact, when I asked my players what they wanted out of the final session, they were very clear that they did not want me to pull any punches. The bard's only wish for the final combat was, and I quote, for us to get wrecked. I decided my goal for the final battle was to knock at least one character unconscious. One of the DMs I met at the castle was JVC Perry, a super prolific game writer, and he sat up late with me in the castle bar that night, workshopping my final boss and helping me write lair actions. It was a masterclass on boss fights. I can't believe I got it for the price of a few drinks. I cannot overstate how much he improved this adventure, not just that night at the castle, but also as a co-writer on the published version that I'm releasing in my shop today. Before I knew it, it was the last day. We got to do archery, which I was pretty good at, especially considering that dexterity is my dump stat, and I finally stopped worrying that my players were going to solve the mystery too early. Our final session started at 8 p.m. and we played until around midnight, and I can honestly say it was the most fun I had ever had DMing. I rolled a natural 20 and the bard Silvery Barbs did, and then I re-rolled it and got another natural 20, and best of all, I successfully knocked out a player character. Please hold your applause. Running a game at D&D in a castle was a trial by fire. I learned so much from that experience about running mysteries, about running games for strangers, about boss battles, about Silvery Barbs. I learned that a $5,000 game halfway across the world was probably not the best place to jump into the deep end of professional DMing. And I learned that the single most powerful thing that I could do to improve my performance as a dungeon master was to actually enjoy the game I'm running. Having fun playing a game?
Groundbreaking.
Oh, and I learned that D&D in a castle is not for me. I don't really know why I did it a second time after this, to be honest. I don't think I'm cut out to run games that people pay thousands of dollars for. I'm just way too anxious for that. But if you want to play the adventure that I ran during this harrowing weekend, an adventure that has been refined and improved and pressure tested more than anything else I've ever written, you can order it at ginnyd.com/shop right now. It's called The Corruption of Alder Glen, and it features writing by me and JVC Perry and beautiful artwork by several extremely talented illustrators. I cannot express how grateful I am for my party, both for their understanding when it came to my own anxiety and for the passion and creativity that they brought to the game. I spent the months before the event making this game hard for myself, and they're the ones who finally made it easy. Alder Glen didn't really come to life until they explored it, and so much of the character and emotion in this adventure book are thanks to them. If your party has even half as much fun in Alder Glen as ours did, then I will consider it a worthy adventure. And I hope your experience running it comes with 100% fewer panic attacks.